The Timeless Pages bookstore remained silent that April morning, its dark wooden shelves supporting centuries of forgotten stories. Among the shadows of those narrow aisles, Eliza Morgan caressed the spines of books like one touching a lover's skin. At 23, she had found in this corner of Charleston, South Carolina, the only place where her restless soul truly rested. Books never judge you for who you are, but for who you might become, she whispered to herself as she placed a first edition of Emily Dickinson back in its place. That phrase had sustained her for years, since she decided to escape her small town in search of a life that truly belonged to her. The old bookstore stood majestic on a corner of the historic Charleston market, with its characteristic brick walls and its carved wooden door that creaked as if telling secrets each time someone entered. Mr. Sullivan, an elderly man with wise eyes and trembling hands, had entrusted Eliza with keeping this literary treasure alive, although the red numbers threatened to bury the business under the relentless weight of modernity. On that rainy day, when drops rhythmically hit the leaded glass windows, Eliza couldn't imagine that her life was about to change forever. Dressed in her long skirt and cotton blouse, her brown hair gathered in a careless braid, she arranged books while humming an old melody. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her ritual. 5 minutes until closing, she thought with mild annoyance, but composed a kind smile before turning around. And then she saw him, tall with broad shoulders covered by a dark coat, dripping rain onto the wooden floor. What impressed Eliza most wasn't his evident elegance or the way he occupied the space, but his eyes, grey like a stormy sky, yet with an unexpected warmth that contradicted his imposing appearance. "I apologize for the intrusion at this hour," he said in a deep voice, removing his soaked coat. "I was seeking refuge from the storm, but I see I've found something far more valuable." His eyes traversed the shelves with a mixture of wonder and reverence that Eliza recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who understood the value of printed words. "We're about to close, but you can stay until the rain subsides," she responded, surprising herself with her offer. He smiled, and something in that smile made time stand still for an instant. "Nathaniel Harrington," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Eliza Morgan," she responded, accepting the gesture. Their fingers brushed briefly, and for a second, Eliza felt that all the love stories she had read in those books made sense in a single instant. What she couldn't know was that this fortuitous encounter would be merely the first chapter of her own story, one that no book could have predicted. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel became a constant presence in the bookstore. He always arrived on Thursday afternoons, when the golden light of the setting sun bathed the facades of the historic Charleston market, transforming the brick to liquid gold. He never bought anything, but spent hours talking with Eliza about poetry, philosophy, and the American soul captured in the pages of Hemingway, Faulkner, and Whitman. "How does someone so young know Thoreau so deeply?" Nathaniel asked during one of his visits, observing with curiosity as Eliza organized a new shipment of books. She blushed slightly. "When you grow up in a place where your voice doesn't matter, you learn to find it in the words of others," she responded, surprising herself with her own sincerity. Nathaniel remained silent for a moment, contemplating her with an intensity that made her feel strangely vulnerable. "And have you found your own voice, Eliza?" he finally asked. The question hung in the air, heavy as a promise. That day, Eliza discovered that Nathaniel Harrington wasn't simply a wealthy man with an affinity for old books. At 43, he had built a business empire from scratch, with investments stretching from New York to San Francisco. His name appeared in economic magazines, and his presence was requested at exclusive events. However, what nobody knew was that behind that image of success hid a man who returned each night to an empty mansion on the outskirts of Charleston, where the echo of his footsteps was his only company. "True loneliness isn't being alone," he confessed one afternoon as they closed the bookstore. "It's being surrounded by people incapable of seeing who you really are." Eliza nodded, understanding that sentiment perfectly. Her life was divided between the bookstore during the day and an elegant restaurant at night, where she waited tables to supplement an income that barely allowed her to survive. In both places, she was invisible to almost everyone, except for Nathaniel, who seemed to see her with a clarity that was as terrifying as it was fascinating. Mr. Sullivan observed this growing friendship with perceptive eyes. One afternoon, while Nathaniel examined a rare edition of Hemingway, The elderly man approached Eliza. "Be careful, child," he warned with a tired voice. "Men like him live in a world different from ours." "We're just friends," Eliza defended herself, though something inside her stirred at his words. The old man smiled sadly. "The heart doesn't understand worlds or social classes, and that is precisely the problem." The warning weighed on Eliza, but not as much as the realization that for the first time in her life, someone saw her as an equal, someone whose opinions mattered, whose dreams deserved to be heard. Everything changed on a June night. Eliza was working at the Southern Plate, one of Charleston's most exclusive restaurants. The heat was suffocating, and she had been awake for 17 hours between both jobs. The crystal lights of the venue suddenly became blurry. The last thing she remembered before darkness engulfed her was the sound of breaking crystal, the tray of wine glasses she was carrying shattering against the marble floor. When she awoke, she wasn't in the public hospital as she expected, but in a private room with a view of St. Philip's Church, and at her side, with a face marked by concern and exhaustion, was Nathaniel. "You fainted," he explained unnecessarily. "Severe dehydration and exhaustion, according to the doctor." Eliza tried to sit up, but he gently stopped her. "Why?" she asked, confused. "Why do this for me?" Nathaniel remained silent for a long moment, as if searching for the right words. "Because everyone deserves to be saved, even if just once," he finally responded. And in his eyes, Eliza saw something that provoked both fear and longing, the possibility of a life different from the one she had always known. The offer came a week later. Nathaniel proposed financing Eliza's master's degree in American literature at the College of Charleston so she could leave her night job. He also secured a small apartment for her near the historic market to spare her the long daily commutes from the peripheral neighborhood where she lived. "I can't accept it," was her immediate response, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of shame and pride. "I don't want to owe anything to anyone." They were sitting in a discreet cafe away from curious eyes. Nathaniel observed her with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "This isn't about debts, Eliza," he explained patiently. "It's about opportunities, about potential. I've seen how your eyes light up when you talk about Dickinson or Whitman. Don't you think you deserve the chance to fully dedicate yourself to what you love? And what would you want in return?" she asked directly, years of accumulated distrust surfacing. The question hit Nathaniel like a slap. His expression hardened for an instant, but then his features softened into a sad smile. "Nothing," he answered simply. "Or perhaps just the satisfaction of seeing what you'd be capable of if the world stopped being against you for once." Eliza studied his face, looking for any indication of falsehood. She found none. "Let me think about it," she finally requested. That night, in her tiny apartment shared with 2 other girls, Eliza couldn't sleep. Nathaniel's words resonated in her head like a persistent echo. Who was this man who appeared in her life, offering her everything she had never dared to dream? And why did the idea of accepting his help terrify her so much? The answer came the next morning, in the form of a call from Mr. Sullivan. His voice trembled on the other end of the phone. "I'm sorry, little one," he said between contained sobs. "They've tripled the rent. I'll have to close the bookstore at the end of the month." Eliza's world collapsed with those words. The bookstore wasn't just her work. It was her home, her refuge, the only place where she felt truly alive. The idea of losing it was unbearable. When Nathaniel appeared that afternoon, he found Eliza with reddened eyes, trying to disguise her pain while she attended to the few customers who entered. "What happened?" he asked with evident concern in his voice. She told him about the imminent closure. To her surprise, Nathaniel didn't offer empty words of consolation. Instead, he remained silent, observing the space attentively, as if seeing it for the first time. "This place is special," he finally said, "not just for the books, but for what it represents. A piece of soul amid an increasingly soulless world." 2 days later, Nathaniel returned with a proposal that would change everything. He would buy the entire building and transform it into a cultural center, keeping the bookstore as its heart. "Why would you do something like this?" Eliza asked, disconcerted by such an offer. "Because some spaces deserve to be preserved," he answered. But his eyes said something more, something that neither of them was prepared to name yet. Mr. Sullivan accepted the offer with tears of relief, and so, without intending to, Eliza found herself tied to Nathaniel by bonds stronger than mere gratitude. What she didn't expect was the emotional price she would have to pay. When she began collaborating on the renovation project, she discovered that Nathaniel's world came with its own rules and expectations. The first test came in the form of a dinner in New York, where she would meet Vivian Harrington, Nathaniel's mother, a woman who preserved the aristocratic pride of past generations in each of her gestures. The Harrington mansion was imposing, with family portraits that went back centuries and servants who moved like silent shadows. Eliza, dressed in the best clothes she could afford, felt like an intruder from the moment she crossed the threshold. "So you're the librarian," commented Vivian, after examining her with critical eyes. It wasn't a question, but a judgment. "Bookseller," Nathaniel gently corrected, "and future director of the new cultural center." The dinner transpired in a tense atmosphere. Each word from Eliza was scrutinized, each gesture judged. When they finally were alone in the sitting room, Vivian was direct. "My son has built an empire that honors our family's legacy," she said with an icy voice. "I will not allow him to destroy it for a whim." "I am not a whim, Ma'am," responded Eliza, surprising even herself with her firmness. "I am a person with my own dreams that don't include ruining your son." The tension was palpable when they returned to Charleston that same night. In the car, silence weighed like a tombstone. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel finally said. "My mother belongs to a world that's dying, but she clings to it desperately." "Maybe she's right," murmured Eliza, looking out the window at the diffuse lights of the highway. "Maybe we should end this before it's too late." Nathaniel stopped the car on the shoulder. He turned to her, and for the first time, Eliza saw true pain in his eyes. "Is that what you want?" he asked with a broken voice. The question floated between them, laden with possibilities and fears, and for the first time since they met, Eliza allowed herself to be completely honest, not just with him, but with herself. "No," she answered in a whisper, "that's not what I want." The renovations of the bookstore began in early July, transforming the space into something that respected its historical essence while preparing it for a promising future. Eliza, initially reluctant to make important decisions, began to find her voice in meetings with architects and designers. Her knowledge of books and the space proved invaluable in preserving the soul of the place. At Nathaniel's suggestion, she finally accepted the scholarship to study for her master's in literature. She dedicated her mornings to classes at the college, afternoons to supervising the bookstore renovations. Her life had changed so drastically in just 3 months that sometimes she woke up disoriented, as if living in someone else's dream. "I don't recognize the person I'm becoming," she confessed one night to Nathaniel, as they shared wine on the balcony of her new apartment with a view of St. Philip's Church. "I do," he responded seriously. She was always there, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. The works revealed hidden surprises in the century-old building, forgotten manuscripts in false ceilings, love letters hidden behind wooden panels, even a small treasure of 18th-century coins in a hole in the wall. Each discovery reinforced the feeling that fate had woven an invisible net to unite them through this magical place. However, not everything was wonderful. The relationship between Eliza and Nathaniel, although deep, remained in an undefined limbo. The attraction between them was undeniable, but both maintained a prudent distance, fearful of the changes that a step forward might provoke. "What exactly are we?" she dared to ask one afternoon, as they reviewed together the plans for the second floor of the bookstore. Nathaniel raised his eyes from the documents, his grey eyes studying her intently. "We are two souls who recognized each other in a world of strangers," he answered with an enigmatic smile. "Isn't that enough for now?" The answer left her unsatisfied, but she didn't insist. Deep down, she knew that both were dealing with their own ghosts. She with her fear of dependency, he with the expectations of a world that measured success in terms very different from love. The true test came when Abigail Crawford, Nathaniel's best friend and partner in several of his businesses, visited Charleston to see the project. Tall, elegant, and with an intelligence that intimidated, Abigail represented everything Eliza was not, or believed she wasn't. "So you're the famous Eliza," she said upon meeting her, evaluating her with perceptive eyes. "Nathaniel doesn't stop talking about you. I was beginning to think you were a literary invention." The afternoon passed with conversations about books, art, and the future of the cultural center. To Eliza's surprise, she found in Abigail not a rival, but an unexpected ally who validated her ideas and expanded her horizons. "I've never seen him like this," commented Abigail when they were alone while Nathaniel took a phone call. "More alive, more authentic." "Like what?" asked Eliza, though she feared the answer. "In love," responded Abigail simply, and terrified to be so. That night, after Abigail returned to New York, Eliza found a letter slipped under her apartment door. It was from Nathaniel, handwritten on thick paper in his elegant calligraphy. In it, for the first time, he fully opened his heart. "Dear Eliza, there are silences that weigh more than all the words ever written. The silence between what we are and what we could be is one of them. I grew up in a world where love was a transaction, a social contract, a strategic alliance. My parents shared 40 years of marriage without a single genuine demonstration of affection. I built an empire trying to fill that void, accumulating successes that no one really celebrated. And then, one rainy day, I entered a bookstore seeking refuge and found much more than that. I found someone who saw beauty in the worn pages of forgotten books, someone who spoke of poetry with the same passion others reserve for material riches, someone who taught me, without intending to, that true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in what possesses us. I don't know what name to give to what we share. I know we come from different worlds, that we face seemingly insurmountable obstacles. But I also know that for the first time in my life, the silence between two people doesn't feel like loneliness, but like the space where something beautiful and fragile blooms. I don't ask you for answers or promises, just that, when you're ready, we break this silence together. Yours, Nathaniel." Eliza read the letter over and over until tears blurred the words. Something had changed inside her, as if a long dormant seed finally began to germinate under the right light. That night she didn't respond to the letter. Instead, she sat at her desk and began to write her own story. The story of a girl who grew up invisible, who found refuge among pages of other people's books, and who now, perhaps, was ready to be the protagonist of her own narrative. The bookstore was reborn day by day, under the joint supervision of Eliza and Nathaniel. The old shelves were masterfully restored, conserving their original details. The walls, once faded, now displayed the characteristic warm tones of Charleston's historic buildings. In the center, a majestic wrought-iron spiral staircase connected the bookstore with the future literary cafe on the second floor. August was ending when the first serious crisis shook the project. The architects discovered serious structural problems in the foundations, hidden for centuries under layers of history. The repair would double the initial budget and delay the inauguration by several months. "It's a sign," murmured Eliza, as they contemplated the modified plans spread on an improvised table amid the construction. "Maybe we're forcing something that shouldn't be." Nathaniel observed her in silence with that look that seemed to penetrate beyond words. "Are you talking about the bookstore or us?" he finally asked. The question hung between them. Since the letter, something had changed in their relationship. They hadn't spoken directly about their feelings, but there was a new intimacy in their daily gestures. Hands that brushed while examining a book, prolonged gazes, comfortable silences. "Everything," responded Eliza with sincerity. "Sometimes I have the feeling I'm living a borrowed life, Nathaniel, that I'm building on sand." He approached and took her hands in his. For the first time there was no hesitation in his gesture. "The best foundations are invisible, Eliza, like what unites us. We can't see it, but it sustains everything else." That night, as she returned to her apartment, Eliza made a decision that would change the course of her story. It wasn't just about accepting her feelings for Nathaniel, but accepting that she deserved the life she was building, that she wasn't an imposter in her own existence. She called her mother, with whom she had barely spoken since leaving her hometown. The conversation was brief and painful, like all the previous ones. "Are you still with that rich man?" her mother asked with disapproval. "People talk, Eliza. They say you've forgotten where you came from." "I haven't forgotten anything, Mum," she responded firmly, "but I also won't apologize for discovering where I'm going." Upon hanging up, Eliza felt a strange lightness. For years, she had carried the weight of others' expectations, to be small, to be invisible, to be grateful for the crumbs. Now she understood that the true act of rebellion wasn't rejecting Nathaniel's help, but accepting that she deserved it. The next morning, she entered the construction site with a determined step. She found Nathaniel heatedly discussing with the main contractor about the excess costs. "There's another solution," she interrupted. All the men turned, surprised by her intervention. "If we use the micropile technique instead of completely reconstructing the foundations, we can stabilize the structure without compromising the historic integrity of the building." The silence that followed her words was revealing. Eliza had spent entire nights researching solutions, consulting architecture professors at the college, studying similar cases in other historic buildings in the city. "It would cost 30% less and reduce the construction time by half," she continued, unfolding the documents she had prepared. The contractor examined the papers with skepticism, which gradually transformed into respect. "It could work," he finally admitted. "It's an elegant solution." When everyone withdrew to recalculate budgets, Nathaniel stood looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "When?" he began, but she interrupted him. "I'd been searching for alternatives for weeks. This place is too important to surrender at the first obstacle." Something changed in Nathaniel's gaze, a flash of admiration that went beyond affection or desire. "Eliza Morgan," he said with a soft voice, "I think I've just completely fallen in love with you." The words floated between them, as tangible as the plans on the table. Eliza felt the world stop for an instant, as if the universe held its breath waiting for her response. "I hope so," she finally answered with a tremulous smile, "because I've been fighting against the same for weeks." That afternoon, for the first time, they crossed together the invisible line they had drawn between them. The kiss they shared amid the scaffolding and construction dust wasn't passionate or dramatic like in the novels Eliza adored. It was soft, tentative, like a question formulated with lips, and in that simple gesture, they found the answer both were seeking. What neither suspected was that, while they demolished their own barriers, other forces were working to erect even higher walls between them. September brought winds of change. The works advanced at a good pace, following Eliza's proposal, and the relationship between her and Nathaniel flourished with the same intensity as the magnolias in the Charleston Gardens, which began to display their first blooms of the season. The news of their relationship, however, wasn't well received in all circles. One morning, while Eliza supervised the installation of the new shelves, she received an unexpected visit. Vivian Harrington, impeccably dressed and with the cold elegance that characterized her, appeared at the door of the construction site. "Impressive," she commented, examining the space with critical eyes. "You've managed to make my son invest a fortune in a business that will barely generate profits." Eliza took a deep breath, determined not to be intimidated. "Benefits aren't always measured in economic terms, Mrs. Harrington." "Precisely that kind of romantic thinking is what ruins empires," responded the woman with disdain. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "I'll be direct, dear. I offer you $1 million to disappear from my son's life." The impact of those words left Eliza breathless. It wasn't just the obscene offer, but the ease with which this woman reduced deep feelings to simple transactions. "Your son is not for sale," she responded with a trembling but firm voice. "And neither am I." Vivian smiled coldly. "Everyone has a price. It's just a matter of finding it." News of the confrontation quickly reached Nathaniel, who appeared hours later, visibly altered. Without a word, he embraced Eliza with an intensity that spoke of fear and determination in equal parts. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I promise this will end." That night, in her apartment, Nathaniel told her the whole truth about his family. They weren't just wealthy entrepreneurs who had built their fortune through real estate investments. They were also the owners of an empire built upon strategic matrimonial alliances over generations. His own father had been selected by Vivian for his political connections, not for love. "She doesn't understand what we have," explained Nathaniel, as they contemplated the lights of the church from the window. "She can't conceive of a world where decisions are made from the heart and not from the bank account." "And what are we going to do?" asked Eliza, feeling that they were walking on increasingly unstable ground. Nathaniel remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon of old rooftops and majestic steeples. "I'm going to break with everything," he finally responded. "With the family business, with expectations, with toxic traditions. I'll build something new, something ours. The determination in his voice scared Eliza as much as it moved her. She realized he was willing to sacrifice everything for her, and that responsibility was overwhelming. "You can't renounce your life for me," she protested. "I'm not renouncing anything," he corrected gently. "I'm finally choosing a life worth living." The consequences weren't long in coming. 3 days later, the main investors in the Cultural Center project, all of them friends or partners of the Harrington family, withdrew their financial support. The local press, initially enthusiastic about the revitalization of a historic building, began to publish articles questioning the economic viability of the project. "It's her," said Nathaniel, throwing a newspaper on the table during an emergency meeting. "She's using all her influences to sink us." Eliza felt that the world they had begun to build together was collapsing like a house of cards. Guilt settled in her chest like a rock. "Maybe you should reconsider," she suggested with a broken voice. We could go separate ways, at least until the center is inaugurated." Nathaniel looked at her as if he had received a slap. "Is that what you want? To surrender to her game?" "What I want is for you not to ruin your life because of me," she exclaimed, tears finally overflowing. "Don't you understand? I couldn't bear to be the cause of your downfall." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with contradictory emotions. Finally, Nathaniel approached and took her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "Listen well, Eliza Morgan," he said, with a serene but firm voice. "All my life I've built what others expected of me. I've accumulated wealth that doesn't make me happy. I've attended events where I feel like a stranger. I've lived a life that doesn't belong to me, and for the first time with you, I feel I'm in the right place. So don't ask me to go back to the shadows." His words hit Eliza deeply, awakening a determination she didn't know she possessed. If he was willing to fight for what they had, she wouldn't be less brave. "Then let's fight," she responded, wiping away her tears. "But together on equal terms, not as your protégé but as your partner." That night they traced a plan. They wouldn't surrender to external pressures, but neither would they follow the path others tried to impose. They would create their own path, one that respected both the past and the future they imagined. What neither of them could foresee was the magnitude of the storm that approached, nor how it would test every aspect of their relationship. The news arrived on a cool October morning, when dried leaves swirled in the historic Charleston market. Nathaniel received a call from Boston that would change the course of all his plans. The prestigious investment firm Blackwell & Associates offered him the directorship of their international expansion, a position he had dreamed of for years, the perfect culmination of his professional trajectory. There was a single requirement. He would have to move to Boston immediately, for at least 2 years. "It's the opportunity you've always waited for," said Eliza when he communicated the news to her. They were in the inner courtyard of the bookstore, now partially restored, with a small stone fountain that murmured softly between them. Nathaniel observed her with intensity, seeking in her eyes something more than the polite words her lips pronounced. "We could make it work," he tentatively suggested. "There are direct flights. You could visit me on weekends. Or I could come to Charleston." Eliza smiled sadly. Both knew that long-distance relationships rarely survived the test of time, especially when they were just beginning to discover each other mutually. "Is that what you want?" she asked, facing the question that hung between them. Nathaniel remained silent, his grey eyes reflecting the internal conflict that tore him apart. On one hand, the culmination of years of hard work. On the other, the promise of something he had never experienced, a true, honest, transformative love. "What I want," he finally responded, "is to not have to choose." That same afternoon, while Eliza reviewed the inventory of the first books that would fill the renovated shelves, she received an unexpected call. It was Abigail Crawford, Nathaniel's friend, requesting an urgent meeting. They met in a discreet cafe near the college. Abigail, elegant as always, but with evident signs of concern, went straight to the point. "Vivian is behind the Boston offer," she revealed without preamble. "She moved all her contacts to get him that position, just to separate him from you." The revelation didn't completely surprise Eliza. Somehow she had intuited that this seemingly perfect opportunity hid the manipulative hand of the Harrington matriarch. "Does Nathaniel know?" she asked, maintaining her composure. Abigail shook her head. "And he shouldn't know, at least not now. I've known him since we were children, Eliza. His pride might lead him to reject a genuinely good opportunity just to defy his mother. Eliza understood the dilemma. If Nathaniel discovered the truth, he would probably refuse the position on principle, potentially damaging his career. But if he accepted without knowing, he would be falling into his mother's trap. "What do you suggest I do?" she finally asked. Abigail's eyes softened with a mixture of admiration and compassion. "What you believe is best for both of you. Just remember that sometimes loving someone means letting them go so they can reach their destiny." That night, while the full moon bathed the rooftops of Charleston with its silver light, Eliza made the most difficult decision of her life. When Nathaniel arrived at her apartment, he found the table set for an intimate dinner, with candles and a bottle of wine decanting. "I want you to accept the position in Boston," said Eliza without beating around the bush, before courage abandoned her. Nathaniel looked at her with surprise. "Are you ending what we have?" "No," she responded firmly. "I'm believing in what we have enough to know it will survive the distance." She explained her reasoning, careful not to mention Abigail's revelation. She told him how the true connection between two people didn't depend on physical proximity, but on the alignment of souls. How both deserved to develop their potential fully. How, if they were destined to be together, they would find their way back to each other. "But the bookstore," he protested weakly. "The bookstore will be waiting for you," assured Eliza. "I will be waiting for you." That night they made love for the first time, with the urgency of those who know time is a luxury they can't afford, but also with the tenderness of those who trust there will be a tomorrow. Their bodies met as if they had always been destined to complete each other mutually, discovering in each caress a new language that transcended words. Afterwards, while Nathaniel slept, Eliza contemplated his relaxed face under the dim light that filtered through the window. She traced with light fingers the contour of his jaw, memorizing each detail, conscious that soon she would only have memories to sustain her. The morning brought the raw reality of her decision. Nathaniel accepted the Boston offer, with the condition that they allow him to delay his incorporation until after the inauguration of the Cultural Center, planned for the end of November. They spent the following weeks in a strange bubble, intensifying each shared moment, as if trying to accumulate enough memories for the months of separation that awaited them. What Eliza couldn't imagine was that the true challenge wouldn't be the physical distance, but something much more insidious that would threaten the very foundations of the trust they had built. The inauguration of the Cultural Center was set for the last Friday of November. The works had been completed successfully following the innovative method proposed by Eliza, and the result exceeded all expectations. The old bookstore was reborn, transformed into a luminous space that respected its historical essence while embracing the future. On the first floor, the restored shelves housed a careful selection of classics and literary novelties. The old wood gleamed under the new lighting, specifically designed to highlight the beautiful bindings without damaging them. In the center, an area with comfortable armchairs invited visitors to immerse themselves in reading. The second floor, connected by the elegant spiral staircase, had been converted into a cozy literary cafe with large windows that offered panoramic views of the historic Charleston market. The tables, each dedicated to a different American author, were arranged to host literary gatherings and book launches. But the real treasure was hidden in the basement, carefully restored to house a collection of first editions and rare manuscripts, some of them discovered during the renovations. This space, which would open only for researchers and guided visits, represented the historical heart of the project. Eliza supervised the final details with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. In just a week, Nathaniel would depart for Boston. Although they had planned regular visits and daily video calls, the imminent separation cast a shadow over what should be a moment of celebration. 2 days before the inauguration, while organizing the contemporary poetry section, Eliza received an unexpected visit. Margaret Morgan, her mother, appeared at the door of the bookstore with an uncomfortable expression. "Mom!" exclaimed Eliza, surprised. They hadn't seen each other for over a year, and their last encounter had ended in tears and recriminations. Margaret observed the space with evident amazement. "It's impressive," she admitted with reluctance. "People in town wouldn't stop talking about it. I had to come see it with my own eyes." The reunion was tense at first, They shared coffee on the second floor, exchanging superficial information about relatives and acquaintances from their hometown. But gradually, the conversation drifted to more personal territory. "Are you happy, daughter?" Margaret finally asked, with a vulnerability that Eliza had never seen in her. The question caught her by surprise. "I think I'm learning to be," she responded with honesty. Margaret nodded as if understanding perfectly. "Your father and I never wanted you to feel insufficient," she confessed, the words coming out with difficulty. "We just wanted to protect you from disappointment, from dreaming too high." "But dreaming is the only thing that keeps us alive," responded Eliza softly. Something changed in her mother's face, a shadow of recognition, perhaps even regret. "You're so like my sister," she murmured. She also believed in dreams, until the world tore them away one by one. For the first time, Margaret spoke about the aunt Eliza had never known, a brilliant woman who had left town to study literature in New York, who had loved passionately and returned devastated, to slowly wither in the family home until her premature death. "Each time I saw that same light in you, that same yearning, I was terrified," confessed Margaret. "But now I see you're stronger than she was, than I have been." That revelation opened a breach in the wall that had always existed between them. It wasn't complete reconciliation, but the beginning of a new understanding. Margaret agreed to stay for the inauguration, lodging in Eliza's small apartment. The morning of the inauguration dawned cold but bright, with that winter sun that bathes Charleston in a special golden light. The cultural center quickly filled with guests, local authorities, college professors, booksellers from all over the country, cultural journalists, and of course, the faithful lifelong customers of the old bookstore. Eliza, dressed with elegant simplicity, moved among the groups with a confidence that months ago would have been unthinkable. She presented the project, explained the restoration decisions, discussed the bibliographical selection with knowledge and passion. By her side, Nathaniel observed her with evident pride. He had set aside his usual business suit for a more casual but equally elegant attire and kept himself discreetly in the background, allowing her to shine on her own merits. Everything was proceeding perfectly until a murmur ran through the room. Vivian Harrington had just made her entrance, imposing in a designer ensemble and accompanied by a distinguished-looking man that Eliza didn't recognize. "I didn't invite her," murmured Nathaniel, visibly tensing. "She must have come to create problems. Or perhaps to build bridges," suggested Eliza, though without much conviction. "Let's greet her." The encounter was more cordial than expected. Vivian congratulated Eliza on the charming little project, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she introduced her companion, Harrison Blackwell, a renowned literary critic and, as they discovered with surprise, distant cousin of the Harrington family, from the Boston branch they had never frequented. "How small the world is," commented Vivian with false naivety. "It seems the Harringtons and the Blackwells have more connections than we imagined." The implicit message was clear. She had investigated their family backgrounds, probably looking for some reason to consider the connection acceptable. The idea was simultaneously offensive and absurd. The real bomb exploded during the official toast. While the mayor pronounced some words of congratulation, a journalist discreetly approached Eliza. "Miss Morgan, can you comment on the rumors that this cultural center is in reality a farewell present from Mr. Harrington before his matrimonial engagement in Boston?" Eliza felt the ground opening beneath her feet. "I beg your pardon?" The journalist consulted his notes. "We have information that Mr. Harrington has accepted the position in Boston as part of an agreement with the Blackwell family, which includes his engagement to Sophia Blackwell, daughter of the president of Blackwell and Associates." The room began to spin around Eliza. Through the haze of shock, she saw Vivian observing the scene with a satisfied smile. Everything fit perfectly. The job offer, the insistence that Nathaniel accept it, even the sudden cordiality. "No comment," she managed to articulate before walking away with trembling steps. She found refuge in the small office in the basement, where the tears she had contained finally overflowed. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. Had he been playing with her all this time? Or was this another manipulation from his mother? The door opened softly, and Nathaniel appeared with a devastated expression. "Eliza, I swear I didn't know anything," he began, approaching her. "It's a complete fabrication. My mother leaked that story to sabotage us." Eliza wanted to believe him, desperately, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. "Is it true that you know Sophia Blackwell?" she asked with a broken voice. Nathaniel's hesitation before responding was answer enough. "I know her," he finally admitted. "Her father and mine were partners, but there is no matrimonial agreement, I swear to you. It's a cruel lie." Eliza nodded mechanically, but something had broken inside her. It wasn't just the possibility that Nathaniel had deceived her. It was the sudden awareness of how different their worlds were, how naive she had been to believe they could overcome all barriers. "I need time," she finally said. "Please go back to the reception. Let's not ruin the inauguration." When Nathaniel left, leaving behind him a deafening silence, Eliza felt more alone than ever. Everything they had built together now seemed built on sand, vulnerable to the first storm. Outside, the celebration continued, but in the penumbra of the basement, surrounded by ancient books that had survived centuries of human storms, Eliza faced the most difficult question of all. Was she brave enough to risk everything for love, knowing she could lose everything in the attempt? The morning after the inauguration, Charleston awoke, covered by a fine layer of frost. The sky, of an intense and clear blue, contrasted with the emotional storm that Eliza carried within. She had spent the night awake, reviewing again and again each moment shared with Nathaniel, searching for signs she might have overlooked, truths hidden behind apparently sincere words. Her mother, surprisingly, had become an unexpected pillar of support. Margaret, who had always distrusted Nathaniel's intentions, now showed an understanding that disconcerted Eliza. "Sometimes the most damaged people are those who most wish to do good," she commented, while they shared a bitter coffee in the small kitchen. "That doesn't make them perfect, just human." Eliza looked at her with surprise. "I thought you would be glad, that you would say, 'I told you so.'" Margaret smiled sadly. "There are few emptier victories than seeing a child suffer and being able to say, 'I warned you.'" News about Nathaniel's supposed engagement appeared in several local newspapers, fueling the rumors. Eliza avoided answering calls or messages, except those strictly related to the cultural center, which had opened its doors to the public with great success. In just 3 days, more than 2,000 people had visited the space, marveling at the careful restoration and the exquisite bibliographical selection. Nathaniel, respecting her request for space, did not try to contact her directly. Instead, he sent her a formal letter through his lawyer, categorically denying the rumors and attaching documentation that proved his contract with Blackwell and Associates did not include any personal or matrimonial clause. He had also initiated legal actions against the media that had published the information without verifying it. The letter ended with a postscript handwritten. "When I entered that bookstore in the rain, I wasn't seeking refuge for my body, but for my soul. I found it in you. Don't let the shadows of the past or fears of the future darken what we've built together. I'll be waiting for as long as it takes." Eliza carefully folded the letter and kept it in her desk drawer, along with that first note that had changed her life. Her heart wanted to believe every word, but an insidious voice inside her, the voice of fear, of insecurity accumulated over years, whispered that it was too good to be true. A week after the inauguration, she received another unexpected visit. Abigail Crawford appeared at the Cultural Center during closing time, when Eliza was organizing the programming of activities for the following month. "I come as a friend," clarified Abigail without preamble, "not as Nathaniel's emissary." They sat in the empty cafe on the second floor, with the illuminated historic Charleston market extending beneath them like a golden stage. "Do you know why I liked you from the beginning?" asked Abigail, absently stirring her tea. "Because I saw in your eyes something that Nathaniel and I share, the fear of not being enough." Eliza looked at her with surprise. Abigail, with her apparent confidence and innate elegance, seemed the last person who would suffer from insecurities. "I grew up in the same high society as Nathaniel," continued Abigail. "A world where a person's value is measured by surnames and bank accounts, where love is just another transaction. Both of us learned from childhood to distrust anyone who showed genuine interest in us." "Why are you telling me this?" asked Eliza, though she began to intuit the answer. "Because you need to understand that when Nathaniel found you, he didn't just discover someone to love. He discovered the possibility of being loved for who he is, not for what he possesses." Abigail looked directly into her eyes. "And now he's terrified of losing that. That you've decided, like so many before, that he's not worth the effort. The words hit Eliza with the force of a revelation. Wasn't she doing exactly the same thing? Looking for excuses to withdraw before completely risking herself to protect herself from a possible rejection? "I'm afraid," she finally confessed, the words escaping like a whisper. Afraid that one day he'll realize he's settled for less than he deserves. Abigail smiled sadly. "That's the real problem, isn't it? It's not the rumors or the distance or even his mother. It's that deep down you still don't believe you deserve to be happy." That night, after Abigail left, Eliza wandered through the cobblestone streets of Charleston, letting the cold of December clarify her thoughts. She reached the Cooper River and contemplated the reflection of the full moon on its waters. The words of Walt Whitman, one of her favorite poets, resonated in her mind. "I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness." Wasn't that love? An act of faith? A continuous creation? A leap into the void without guarantees? Upon returning to her apartment, she found her mother packing to return to their hometown. "You're leaving already?" asked Eliza, surprised by the pang of sadness she felt. Margaret nodded. "You found your place, daughter. You no longer need me here." "I'll always need you, Mum," she responded, impulsively embracing her. Margaret held her tightly, and in that embrace, Eliza felt another circle closing, another wound beginning to heal. "My sister used to say that life offers few opportunities for true happiness," murmured Margaret against her hair, "and that letting them pass out of fear is the only unforgivable mistake." After saying goodbye to her mother at the bus station, Eliza made a decision. She wouldn't let fear dictate her future. She deserved to take risks, deserved to believe, deserved to try with all her might. But first, she needed to be sure of something fundamental, that she could sustain herself, whatever happened. That night, she wrote 2 letters. The first, addressed to Nathaniel, was brief but sincere. "I believe you, and more importantly, I'm learning to believe in myself. But before continuing our path together, I need to walk a stretch on my own. This isn't a goodbye but a see you soon. Go to Boston, pursue your dreams. I will be here building mine when you return. If what we have is real, it will flourish with distance rather than wither." The second letter was for herself, a reminder of who she was, who she wanted to be, and the principles that would guide her life from now on. She sealed it and kept it in the same drawer where she kept Nathaniel's letters, like a talisman against the moments of doubt that would inevitably come. 2 days later, Nathaniel departed for Boston. They didn't say goodbye in person. Both knew it would be too painful, but they exchanged simple messages that contained more meaning than long declarations. "I'll be waiting. Eliza. I'll return. Nathaniel." And so, with the promise of an uncertain but possible future floating between them, they began their physical separation. What neither could foresee was how this distance, which threatened to separate them definitively, would end up being precisely what they needed to truly find each other. January arrived with cold winds that dragged snowflakes through the streets of Charleston. The Timeless Pages Cultural Center had become a welcoming refuge against the cold, where students, professors, and literature lovers found not only books, but also stimulating conversations and the tempting aroma of hot chocolate served in the cafe on the second floor. Eliza had completely immersed herself in managing the space, transforming the pain of separation into creative energy. Under her direction, the center wasn't simply a bookstore with a cafe, but a true cultural nucleus where literary gatherings, writing workshops, book launches, and exhibitions by local artists were organized. The first great success came when she managed to get Toni Morrison, one of the most prestigious contemporary American writers, to accept presenting her latest novel at the center. The event attracted people from all over South Carolina, filling every corner of the space and generating media coverage that put Timeless Pages on the national cultural map. "You've built something extraordinary," commented the writer after the presentation while signing copies. "Spaces like this are increasingly rare and increasingly necessary." Those words confirmed something Eliza was beginning to understand. The cultural center wasn't just Nathaniel's dream come true, but also her own. Each decision she made, from the selection of books to the programming of activities, bore her personal imprint, her unique vision. Communication with Nathaniel remained constant but measured. They spoke via video call once a week, sharing news about their respective lives. He told her about the challenges of establishing the new European headquarters of Blackwell, about the persistent snow of Boston, and about how he missed the mild climate of Charleston. She talked about the center's events, about the new books she had discovered, about the small daily victories. What they didn't say, at least not directly, was how much they missed each other, how each conversation left a void that took days to dissipate. They had agreed to give themselves this time of separate growth, and both respected the pact with a mixture of determination and longing. In February, Eliza received a proposal that left her breathless. The prestigious publishing house HarperCollins offered her the direction of a new collection dedicated to recovering forgotten works by 20th-century female American authors. They had contacted her after reading an article she had published in a literary magazine, where she analyzed the systematic invisibilization of female voices in the American literary canon. "It's a unique opportunity," she commented to Abigail during one of their bi-weekly lunches, which had become a tradition. "But it would involve traveling constantly between New York and Charleston." "And what's holding you back?" asked Abigail, observing her perceptively. Eliza remained silent. The truth was that nothing was holding her back, and that precisely frightened her. For the first time in her life, she felt she could spread her wings without fear of crashing. The sensation was so new, so intoxicating, that it almost felt terrifying. "I think it scares me to discover that I can be completely happy on my own," she finally confessed. "What if I no longer need him when he returns?" Abigail smiled tenderly. "True love isn't about need, Eliza. It's about choice. About two complete people who decide to be even better together." That conversation was a turning point. Eliza accepted the editorial proposal and reorganized her life to balance both responsibilities. She hired Olivia, a young historian passionate about literature, as deputy director of the Cultural Center for the days she needed to be absent. The dynamic between them reminded Eliza of her own initial relationship with Mr. Sullivan, knowledge being transmitted, a torch being passed from hand to hand. Spring brought not only the blooming of the magnolias in the historic city, but also an inner blossoming in Eliza. Each trip to New York, each negotiation with authors or literary agents, each business decision strengthened her. The insecure young woman who trembled when speaking in public was gradually transformed into a woman secure in her worth, in her voice, in her place in the world. During one of her trips to the Big Apple, she coincided with Vivian Harrington at a book launch. The encounter, initially uncomfortable, took an unexpected turn. "I must admit you've surprised me," commented the aristocratic woman while they shared a reluctant coffee on the terrace of a luxury hotel. "I expected you to disappear as soon as my son left for Boston." "Sorry to disappoint you," responded Eliza with a serene smile. "I was never here for your son. I was here for the books, for creating something meaningful." Nathaniel simply saw what no one else had seen. Something subtly changed in Vivian's expression. It wasn't respect exactly, but a recognition that she had underestimated the young bookseller. "Perhaps we both saw things that the other couldn't see," she conceded enigmatically. Upon returning to Charleston that night, Eliza found in her mailbox a small box sent from Boston. Inside was a first edition of The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, one of her favorite novels, about a young woman who struggles to find her identity in oppressive 1950s America. The attached note was brief but moving. "Because, like Esther, you've found your own voice amid the noise. Because, like her, you've learned that true freedom begins when we stop seeking approval. I admire you more each day. N." That night, sitting on the small balcony of her apartment with the precious book in her hands, Eliza understood something fundamental. She wasn't building a life without Nathaniel. She was building a life worthy of sharing with him when the time came. The revelation brought with it a peace that had eluded her for months. She no longer feared that distance would separate them or that success would lead them along divergent paths. On the contrary, each achievement, each new discovery, each step in her personal growth brought her closer to being the partner he deserved, not because she was incomplete before, but because she now fully recognized her own worth. What Eliza couldn't foresee was that, while she flourished in South Carolina, Nathaniel faced challenges in Boston that would test not only their relationship, but also the fundamental values upon which he had built his entire life. Summer brought to Charleston a stifling heat wave that converted the cobblestone streets into ovens during the day. Tourists sought refuge in the cool rooms of the cultural center, where Eliza had strategically installed fans and free hydration stations. The influx of visitors had exceeded all expectations, making Timeless Pages one of the city's essential cultural destinations. In Boston, however, Nathaniel faced a different storm. The international expansion project of Blackwell & Associates had unexpectedly complicated. He had discovered irregularities in some contracts that suggested questionable business practices, not necessarily illegal, but certainly ethically dubious. During one of their weekly video calls, Eliza noticed the tension in his face, the dark circles that revealed sleepless nights. "What's happening?" she asked directly, concerned about his evident exhaustion. Nathaniel hesitated. They had agreed to keep their professional lives separate during this period, to allow each to grow independently, but the weight of the ethical dilemma he faced was too much to bear alone. "I've discovered that Blackwell has been acquiring small publishers throughout the country with the sole purpose of dismantling them and absorbing their catalogs," he finally confessed. "They're destroying independent cultural projects to monopolize the market." The irony was painful. He, who had saved a small bookstore in Charleston, was now part of machinery that did exactly the opposite on a larger scale. "What are you going to do?" asked Eliza, though she already intuited the answer. "The right thing," he responded simply, "even if it means losing everything." The following weeks were of absolute uncertainty. Nathaniel presented a detailed report to the board of Blackwell, exposing the questionable practices and proposing an alternative strategy that would allow sustainable growth without destroying the cultural fabric. His proposal was received with a mixture of indignation and veiled threats. The ultimatum came in early August: withdraw the report and continue with the original strategy, or present his immediate resignation. There was no middle ground. "I'll resign," he communicated to Eliza during a late call. "I can't be complicit in something that goes against everything I believe in." Eliza felt a mixture of pride and concern. "What will you do afterward?" "Return to Charleston," he responded without hesitation, "if you'll accept me back." The question hung between them, laden with meanings and possibilities. They had agreed to 6 months of separation, and only 4 had passed. Were they ready to reunite? To resume what they had left on pause? "You'll always have a place here," responded Eliza carefully, "but I don't want you to return for the wrong reasons, out of escape or defeat." "I would return for the only reason that matters," he said, his voice softening, "because that's where my heart is." The day Nathaniel formally presented his resignation, the scandal exploded in Boston's financial circles. Someone, it was never known who, leaked parts of the report about Blackwell's questionable practices to the press. The company's shares plummeted, and several of the small publishers that were in the process of acquisition broke off negotiations. Amid the chaos, Nathaniel received a surprising call. It was the legendary independent publisher Jonathan Lockhart, known for his unwavering defense of quality literature against commercial pressures. "We need people with your integrity," he told him straightforwardly. "I offer you the direction of our new national division, with total editorial and ethical autonomy." The offer was tempting, prestigious, aligned with his values, and it would allow him to remain in the publishing world he had come to love. There was just one problem. The headquarters would be in New York, not Charleston. When he told Eliza about the proposal, she maintained a long silence. "You should accept it," she finally said, though each word cost her an immense effort. "It's a perfect opportunity for you." "And us?" he asked, the vulnerability evident in his voice. "We'll find the way," she responded, with a certainty she didn't know she possessed. "If we survived Boston, we can survive New York." The decision was made, but the universe had other plans. 3 days before Nathaniel was to sign the contract with Lockhart Publishing, he received another unexpected call. This time, it was Abigail, and the news she brought would again change the course of their lives. "Your mother has suffered a stroke," she informed without preamble. "The doctors say she will recover, but she will need care for months." Nathaniel returned that same night, not to Charleston, but to New York, where Vivian was hospitalized. The differences and conflicts of the past vanished in the face of the sudden fragility of that woman who, despite everything, remained his mother. Eliza traveled immediately to New York to support him. In the aseptic waiting room of the hospital, they reunited after 4 months of separation. There were no grandiloquent words or dramatic gestures, just a long and silent embrace that said everything they needed to say. "Thank you for coming," he murmured against her hair. "I couldn't face this alone." Together, they established a plan for Vivian's care. Nathaniel would temporarily install himself in the family mansion in New York and hire specialized staff for rehabilitation. Eliza would return to Charleston to continue with the cultural center, but would travel to New York on weekends. What neither expected was Vivian's reaction when, days later, she saw Eliza enter her hospital room with a bouquet of fresh flowers. "So you're still here," she commented with a weak but still imperious voice. "I'm still here," Eliza confirmed simply. The elderly woman studied her with tired but still perceptive eyes. "Nathaniel told me what you've achieved in Charleston, and in New York, with that publisher." Eliza nodded, surprised by the turn in the conversation. "My son was right about you," continued Vivian. "You are stronger than you appear." It wasn't an apology. Vivian would probably never explicitly ask for forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement, a small but significant step toward reconciliation. That night, while dining in a discreet restaurant near the hospital, Nathaniel handed Eliza an envelope. "I declined it," he said simply, "the position in New York." "But it was perfect for you," she protested, disconcerted. "No, it wasn't," he responded with a serene smile. "Because I found something better." He explained his new plan to create a cultural foundation headquartered in Charleston, dedicated to preserving historic bookstores and small independent publishers throughout the country. He would use his contacts and international experience, but from home with her. "And your mother?" asked Eliza, though the real question was another. "Are you doing this for me or for yourself?" "New York is just a short flight away," he responded, understanding the underlying question. "And this isn't a sacrifice, Eliza. It's a choice, my choice." That night in the hotel room that Eliza had reserved in New York, they made love with the intensity of those who have been separated too long, but also with the tenderness of those who know they have all the time in the world ahead. Their bodies met like old friends, resuming an interrupted conversation, remembering each sensitive point, each preferred caress. Afterward, while Nathaniel slept, Eliza contemplated the lights of New York through the window. She had feared this moment, feared discovering that the separation had cooled their feelings, or worse yet, that only the idealization of distance had kept them alive. Instead, she discovered that their connection had strengthened, like a muscle that develops with the right effort. It wasn't just about romantic love, it was mutual respect, shared admiration, aligned values. They had grown separately to be able to walk together as equals. With that comforting thought, Eliza let herself fall into a deep sleep, conscious that the true challenges and the true rewards were just beginning. Autumn came to Charleston, painting the trees in the historic market with copper and golden tones. Exactly 1 year had passed since that rainy day when Nathaniel first entered the old bookstore seeking refuge. 12 months of transformation, separation, growth, and reunion. Vivian's recovery advanced slowly but steadily. Surprising everyone, especially her son, the proud matriarch had shown admirable resilience. The rehabilitation sessions, which she initially received with constant complaints, she now faced with Spartan determination. Even more surprising was the gradual but undeniable connection that began to form between her and Eliza. It wasn't friendship. Both were too different, with wounds too deep for that, but a mutual respect that no one would have imagined possible months ago. It all began when Eliza, during one of her weekend visits to New York, brought with her some printer's proofs of the first books in her collection of forgotten female authors. Vivian, bored with hospital confinement, asked to see them out of mere curiosity. "My grandmother knew Edith Wharton," she commented casually, while leafing through the manuscript prepared by Eliza. "She said she was brilliant but too modern for her time." That comment initiated a conversation about women who had defied the conventions of their time, some through literature, others through the aristocratic salons that Vivian knew so well. To Eliza's surprise, the elderly woman possessed an encyclopedic knowledge about genealogies and anecdotes of 20th century American high society. invaluable information for contextualizing the works Eliza was recovering. "You should formally interview her," suggested Nathaniel one night, after Eliza enthusiastically told him about the stories his mother had shared. It would be an invaluable historical testimony. The idea crystallized into a parallel project, a series of interviews with elderly women from different social extractions whose experiences illuminated the historical contexts of the rescued authors. Vivian not only agreed to be the first interviewee, but used her considerable social contacts to open doors to other women of her generation. For the first time, Eliza glimpsed the person behind the aristocratic facade, a woman who, in her own way and within the confines of her era, had also fought to define her own path. Meanwhile, Nathaniel gave shape to his cultural foundation with the same passion and meticulousness he had applied to his previous ventures. The Harrington Foundation for Cultural Preservation was officially established in October, headquartered in an elegant historic building near the Timeless Pages Cultural Center. Its mission, to identify historic bookstores and small publishers at risk of disappearance, and provide them the financial and strategic support necessary to survive in the digital era. The Foundation's first project, however, wasn't a bookstore but a century-old printing press in Savannah, specialized in traditional techniques of artisanal binding. The Michaels Brothers Press, founded in 1898, was about to close when Nathaniel proposed a collaboration. The foundation would finance the partial modernization of their equipment, and they would produce limited luxury editions for collectors. The success was immediate. The first numbered editions sold out in less than a week. "You've found your true vocation," commented Eliza one afternoon as they toured the old printing press, now vibrant with activity. "I wouldn't have discovered this path without you," he responded, taking her hand in his. "You taught me to see the value of preserving what has soul." Their relationship had found a new balance. They lived officially separate. He divided his time between Charleston and New York, she between Charleston and her editorial travels, but emotionally they were more united than ever. They had learned to give each other space, to respect their respective careers and commitments, to communicate with honesty even in difficult moments. Not everything was perfect, of course. They had occasional discussions, misunderstandings, moments of doubt. But they faced each obstacle together, with the maturity they had gained during their separation. The true challenge came in early November, when Nathaniel received an unexpected offer. The College of Charleston, impressed by his work with the foundation, proposed he create and direct a chair in management and preservation of cultural heritage. It was a unique opportunity to transmit his knowledge to new generations, to influence cultural policies, to consolidate his legacy. There was a single problem. It would imply establishing himself permanently in Charleston and significantly reducing his trips to New York, just when his mother was beginning to depend more on his regular presence. "You can't reject it because of me," declared Vivian when he explained his dilemma during a visit. The recovery had softened some of her harder traits, but her voice remained imperious. "You've already sacrificed enough." "This isn't about sacrifices, Mother," responded Nathaniel with patience. "It's about balancing responsibilities." Vivian remained silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the garden visible from her room's window. Finally, she made a decision that surprised her son. "I'll move to Charleston," she announced with determination. "That city always had a certain provincial charm. Besides, the college has an excellent department of art history. I could donate part of our family collection and personally supervise its cataloging." The proposal left Nathaniel speechless. It was a completely unexpected gesture coming from his mother, who had always despised life outside New York. "Are you sure?" he asked, concerned that the illness had affected her judgment. "Completely," she responded with an enigmatic smile. "Besides, someone has to ensure that that young woman of yours doesn't completely ruin our surname." The comment could have been offensive months ago, but now Nathaniel detected the dry humor hidden behind his mother's words. It was her particular way of offering an olive branch. The news that Vivian Harrington would move to Charleston caused commotion in New York social circles and expectation in the university city. Eliza, initially concerned about the constant proximity of her former adversary, unexpectedly found in her an ally in her cultural projects. "Your collection needs greater academic rigor," commented Vivian during tea at the Cultural Center's cafe, "and better contacts for international distribution." I can help you with both. The collaboration between these two very different women, united by their love for Nathaniel and their passion for cultural preservation, soon began to bear extraordinary fruit. The collection of forgotten female authors gained academic prestige thanks to prologues by recognized specialists that Vivian convinced to participate. At the same time, the publisher's international connections multiplied, taking the rescued works beyond American borders. Meanwhile, Nathaniel assumed the university chair with renewed enthusiasm. His classes quickly became the most popular on campus, attracting not only students but also professionals from the cultural sector throughout the country. His practical approach, combining academic theory with real business experience, transformed his students into true agents of cultural change. One afternoon in late November, while they strolled through the college's gardens enjoying the last rays of autumn's sun, Nathaniel suddenly stopped and took Eliza's hands in his. "Exactly 1 year ago, we entered the bookstore soaked by rain," he recalled with a smile. "And at that moment, though I didn't know it, my life changed forever." Eliza nodded, vividly remembering that first encounter that now seemed predestined. "I've been thinking," he continued, suddenly nervous. "Perhaps it's time to formalize what we have. Not for social convention, but because I want to officially build a future together." It wasn't a traditional marriage proposal. There was no ring or knee on the ground, but something much more significant for them. An invitation to merge not only their personal lives, but also their professional projects, their dreams, their legacies. "Are you asking me to marry you, or to merge our companies?" asked Eliza with a mischievous smile. "Both," he responded, following the joke. "A complete personal and professional marriage. The Harrington Foundation and the HarperCollins collection under one roof, literally and metaphorically." Eliza pretended to consider it seriously. "I'll have to consult with my partner," she joked, referring to Vivian, whose influence on the editorial collection had grown considerably. "She already gave her approval," revealed Nathaniel, surprising her. In fact, it was her idea. The revelation left Eliza momentarily speechless. The path from open hostility to this acceptance had been long and complicated, with retreats and advances, but they had finally arrived at a place of mutual respect that neither would have believed possible a year ago. "In that case," she finally responded, "I think we have a deal, Mr. Harrington." They kissed under the golden November sun, with the ancient city extending at their feet as a silent witness to their commitment. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, with its own challenges and joys, in a story that would continue to be written day by day. What neither could imagine was that fate still held one more surprise for them, one that would test, one last time, the solidity of the foundations they had built together. December wrapped Charleston in a mantle of morning mist and Christmas lights that reflected on the damp cobblestones. The timeless Pages Cultural Center had been transformed for the season. Holly garlands adorned the shelves, a modest but elegant fir tree stood beside the spiral staircase, and the aroma of cinnamon and fresh coffee permeated the cafe, where they served eggnog and fruitcake. The wedding preparations advanced discreetly. Eliza and Nathaniel had opted for an intimate ceremony in early spring, only with close family and friends. Neither wanted the social spectacle that Vivian would have organized in other times, though the matriarch had accepted the decision with surprising grace. "Age has made me sentimental," she commented when Nathaniel communicated their plans. "Or perhaps I've simply tired of fighting against the inevitable." The relationship between Eliza and her future mother-in-law had evolved toward a mutual respect that, while it couldn't be called maternal affection, was comfortable for both. They shared cultural projects, exchanged ideas about the editorial collection, even occasionally enjoyed tea afternoons commenting on the latest literary discoveries. Everything seemed headed toward a harmonious future, when a week before Christmas, news arrived that would again alter their plans. Jonathan Lockhart, the legendary independent publisher who had offered Nathaniel the position in New York months ago, suddenly died of a heart attack. In his will, he had left explicit instructions. He wanted Nathaniel Harrington to assume the general directorship of Lockhart Publishing, with total freedom to determine its future. "It's an extraordinary legacy," commented Abigail, who had traveled from Boston to accompany them in this crucial moment. The three shared dinner in Eliza's apartment, while winter rain softly fell on the colonial rooftops. Lockhart is one of the last truly independent major publishers. Its catalog is impeccable. And it's based in New York, added Eliza, verbalizing what everyone was thinking. The silence that followed was laden with implications. Accepting would mean moving to New York, just when they had established a stable life in Charleston. It would mean reorganizing the foundation, the university chair, Vivian's care. It would mean, in essence, undoing much of what they had built over the last year. "I can decline it," Nathaniel finally said. "We've worked too hard to get where we are." "But it's the opportunity of your life," responded Eliza. "The final recognition of everything you stand for." Neither slept that night. They remained awake on the apartment balcony, wrapped in blankets, contemplating the sleeping city under the rain, discussing possibilities, fears, dreams. "What if we divide ourselves?" suggested Nathaniel at some point. "I in New York, you here, traveling regularly as we did before." "It worked temporarily," acknowledged Eliza. "But it's not sustainable long-term, not if we want to eventually start a family." The mention of children, a topic they had vaguely discussed but never with seriousness, added a new dimension to the conversation. Both had reached a point in their lives where that possibility began to materialize as a concrete desire, not just a future abstraction. "We could take everything to New York," proposed Nathaniel. "The foundation can operate from there, your editorial collection too. And your mother, the cultural center, the chair," responded Eliza, enumerating the anchors they had established in Charleston. They didn't find answers that night, nor in the following days. The dilemma pursued them as they continued with their daily routines, prepared the Christmas celebration, attended professional commitments. Each tried to imagine a future in New York, another in Charleston, seeking the combination that would allow preserving the essential without sacrificing the extraordinary opportunity that Lockhart Publishing represented. It was Vivian, surprisingly, who offered a different perspective. During Christmas dinner, while they shared a relatively calm moment in the library of the house she had acquired in Charleston, the matriarch directly addressed the topic everyone was avoiding. "You're framing the question incorrectly," she declared with the authority that characterized her. "It's not about choosing between New York and Charleston. It's about defining what kind of life you want to build." Both looked at her with surprise. They didn't expect it would be her who adopted a philosophical stance on their dilemma. "What do you mean, Mother?" asked Nathaniel, intrigued by this new facet. "Throughout my life I pursued what society dictated as success," explained Vivian, her gaze lost in the flames of the fireplace. "Proper marriage, social position, influence, power. And I achieved all that. The result? A perfectly structured life, but empty at its core." Eliza and Nathaniel exchanged surprised looks. They had never heard the proud woman speak with such frankness about her own life choices. "What I'm trying to tell you," she continued, "is that no professional opportunity, however brilliant, deserves sacrificing what you've built. And this coming from me, who dedicated my life to climbing social positions." Her words resonated deeply in both. It wasn't advice to reject New York, but an invitation to evaluate their priorities with clarity, to distinguish between ambition and true purpose. The conversation extended until the early hours of the morning. For the first time, the three spoke as equals, sharing experiences, fears, and hopes without the barriers that normally separated them. Vivian revealed details of her arranged marriage, of her abandoned youthful dreams, of how she had channeled her own frustrations through impossible expectations for her son. That night transformed something fundamental in the family dynamic. The shared vulnerability created a new bond among them, based not on obligations or expectations, but on mutual understanding. 2 days later, in the post-Christmas tranquility, Eliza and Nathaniel finally reached a decision. "I'll accept the direction of Lockhart," announced Nathaniel as they walked through the sunlit courtyard of the College of Charleston. But with conditions. His plan was revolutionary, to completely decentralize the publishing house. The main headquarters would remain in New York, but they would establish autonomous divisions in Charleston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Boston, each specialized in a different aspect of the catalog, operating with creative independence, but under a unified vision. "We'll demonstrate that a publisher can function as an American cultural network, not as a centralized hierarchical structure," he explained with growing enthusiasm. "We'll apply to the publishing industry the principles we defend for cultural preservation. Eliza listened to him with admiration. The proposal was bold, innovative, perfectly aligned with their shared values. It represented not a compromise between New York and Charleston, but a complete reinvention of the traditional publishing model. "Do you think the shareholders will accept it?" she asked, conscious of the practical challenges they would face. "Lockhart left me majority control precisely because he trusted I would maintain his vision, not the markets," responded Nathaniel. "This is the natural evolution of what he began." On the last day of the year, while the historic Charleston market filled with people waiting for the midnight bell, Eliza and Nathaniel signed the preliminary documents of what would be their most ambitious joint project. The merger of the Harrington Foundation, Eliza's editorial collection, and the decentralized structure of Lockhart Publishing under a single integrated vision, to create a sustainable cultural ecosystem that preserved the best of the past while embracing the possibilities of the future. That night, as the bells of St. Philip's Church announced the new year and fireworks illuminated the Charleston sky, they kissed on the balcony of the cultural center. It wasn't just the celebration of a new year, but of a new stage in their shared journey. "To the bridges we've built," toasted Nathaniel, raising his champagne glass. "And to those we still have to build," completed Eliza. In their eyes shone the certainty that, regardless of the challenges the future held for them, they would face them together as equals, each contributing their unique strength to the shared journey. Spring arrived in Charleston with an explosion of colors and aromas. The magnolias in the college gardens burst into bloom, cafe terraces filled again with students and tourists, and the Cooper River flowed with renewed energy after the winter rains. It was the first Saturday of April, and the Timeless Pages Cultural Center had exceptionally closed its doors to the public. Today wasn't a day for books and coffee. It was the day when Eliza Morgan and Nathaniel Harrington would officially seal their union, both personal and professional. The ceremony, intimate but elegant, was celebrated in the inner courtyard of the building. The ancient brick walls were decorated with garlands of wildflowers. A dozen chairs arranged in a semicircle accommodated the few guests: Margaret, Eliza's mother; Vivian, surprisingly emotional; Abigail, radiant as maid of honor; Mr. Sullivan, the old bookstore owner, now honorary advisor to the Cultural Center, and some close friends who had accompanied their journey. Eliza waited in the small office on the second floor, contemplating her reflection in the mirror. The dress she had chosen wasn't the traditional pompous white, but a simple ivory design that perfectly adjusted to her silhouette. She wore her hair gathered in a low bun, adorned with small fresh flowers, and as her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to Nathaniel's grandmother, a surprise gift from Vivian that very morning. "You're beautiful," said a voice from the door. Eliza turned to find her mother, elegantly dressed in a deep blue tone that highlighted her eyes. The relationship between them had significantly improved over the last year, though it remained complex. They had learned to accept each other as they were, not as they would have wanted the other to be. "Thank you, Mum," she responded with a nervous smile. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Margaret approached and took her daughter's hands in hers. "Are you happy?" she asked simply. "More than I ever believed possible," responded Eliza without hesitation. "Then you're doing exactly what you should do." Margaret gently squeezed her hands. "Your aunt would be so proud of you, of the woman you've become." The mention of that aunt she had never known, but whose restless spirit seemed to have always accompanied her, deeply moved Eliza. In recent months, she had investigated more about her, discovering a brief but intense life, marked by the yearning for freedom in an era that systematically denied female independence. "I'll carry her with me today," murmured Eliza, embracing her mother. Downstairs in the courtyard, Nathaniel waited with a mixture of nervousness and absolute certainty. He wore a dark blue tailored suit without a tie, with a small wildflower in his lapel that matched the courtyard decorations. At his side, as best man, was Harrison Blackwell, the literary critic and distant relative who, irony of fate, had become an invaluable ally for their joint editorial projects. When Eliza appeared at the top of the spiral staircase, a reverent silence fell over the guests. She descended the steps with serene grace, each step marking the end of one path and the beginning of another. She didn't walk on anyone's arm. She had decided to give herself away, a symbol of the autonomy she had fought so hard to conquer. The ceremony was brief but deeply emotional. Instead of traditional vows, each read a literary fragment that represented their vision of shared love. Nathaniel chose a passage from F. Scott Fitzgerald about mature love as companionship and mutual respect. Eliza responded with verses from Emily Dickinson that spoke of freedom within commitment, of wings that fly higher when they intertwine. The most moving moment came when, instead of rings, they exchanged books. Nathaniel gave Eliza a restored first edition of Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, a novel about a woman who finds her voice and her strength through adversities. Eliza gave him a unique copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, with handwritten annotations by the poet himself in the margins, a bibliographic treasure she had found almost miraculously during the restoration of the bookstore's basement. "So we never forget that our roots and our wings come from the same pages," she said as she handed him the book. After the ceremony, they shared an intimate lunch on the terrace of the second floor. There were no grandiloquent speeches or elaborate rituals, just good food, better conversations, and the warmth of knowing themselves surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated their union. In mid-afternoon, when the guests began to say goodbye, Vivian requested a moment alone with the couple. She led them to a quiet corner of the garden where she took from her elegant purse a sealed envelope. "My wedding gift," she announced with a dignity tinged with contained emotion. Inside the envelope were legal documents that transferred to the Harrington Foundation the complete ownership of 3 historic buildings in New York, Chicago, and Boston. Properties that had belonged to the family for generations and that would now be destined to house new headquarters of their decentralized editorial project. "I want to be part of what you're building," explained the matriarch. "Not as supervisor or benefactor, but as collaborator. These buildings deserve to house something with soul, not become boutique hotels or luxury stores." The gesture left both speechless. It wasn't just the material value of the donation, but the profound symbolic meaning. Vivian, the fiercest guardian of the family patrimony, consciously chose to break with centuries-old traditions to support the renovating vision of the next generation. "Thank you, Mother," Nathaniel managed to articulate, visibly moved. "We will honor this legacy." "I know you will," she responded with unusual softness. "You've already demonstrated knowing how to preserve the valuable while discarding the obsolete. It's a lesson that has taken me too long to learn." When she moved away to join the other guests, Eliza and Nathaniel remained silent for a moment, processing the meaning of what had just happened. It wasn't simply a generous wedding gift. It was the culmination of a long process of reconciliation, the healing of family wounds that went back generations. That night, after the last guest left, they returned to the cultural center. The full moon bathed the courtyard with silver light, converting the ancient stones into an almost magical scenario. They climbed to the terrace on the second floor and contemplated the illuminated historic Charleston market, the same panorama they had admired during their first conversations a year and a half ago. "Do you remember when I asked if you had found your own voice?" said Nathaniel, embracing her from behind. Eliza nodded, leaning against his chest. "And I didn't know how to respond. And now?" Eliza turned to look at him directly, her bright eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Now I know my voice was always there. It just needed the courage to be heard." They kissed under the starry sky of Charleston, conscious that the chapter they closed today gave way to another equally exciting one. The challenges hadn't ended. The restructuring of Lockhart Publishing was just beginning. The expansion of the cultural project would face inevitable obstacles. Their own relationship would continue evolving with time. But now they had the certainty that together they could write any story they wished. The following morning, while the sun began to illuminate the historic city, Eliza awoke before Nathaniel. She rose silently and approached the desk where a notebook of blank pages rested, a gift from Abigail with a simple inscription, "For your next story." She took a pen and wrote on the first page, "They say that great loves, like great books, begin with a phrase that captures you and end with one that transforms you forever. Ours began in the rain, among yellowed pages and postponed dreams. But it doesn't end. Rather, it continues to be written each day, with the certainty that the best stories aren't those that follow predictable formulas, but those that dare to invent their own language. This is our blank page, our opportunity to write together, a future that honors the past without being prisoner to it, a future where preserving doesn't mean freezing, but giving new life, where loving doesn't imply possessing but liberating, where success is measured not in individual achievements, but in shared dreams. The true value of books isn't in the answers they offer, but in the questions we dare to formulate thanks to them. Our story is just beginning to ask the right questions. And in that joint questioning, in that shared search, we will find our own happy ending, which isn't an ending at all, but a continuous discovery of the other and of oneself. When she finished writing, she contemplated the words with satisfaction. Then she gently closed the notebook and returned to bed, where Nathaniel slept peacefully. She cuddled next to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Outside, Charleston awakened with its centenary rhythm. The church bells announced a new day. Students began to fill the cobblestone streets. Booksellers opened their doors. Cafes served the first breakfasts. Life continued its imperturbable course. And inside the golden walls of that transformed old bookstore, two souls who had recognized each other among millions truly began to write their shared story. A story without a pre-established ending, open to all the possibilities that only true love, based on mutual respect and sincere admiration, can imagine. Because, as Eliza had learned during her extraordinary journey, the best books, like the best loves, don't tell you who you should be but help you discover who you really are. And in Nathaniel's eyes, she had finally found the reflection of her true self, strong, valuable, capable, worthy of being loved, not despite her imperfections, but precisely for the authenticity these revealed. The rest of their lives would be simply the natural development of that shared revelation. A development as unpredictable, as full of surprises, challenges and joys as any great novel that deserves to be read to the last page.